Hello everyone. If you love heartwarming animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. The house was quiet, too quiet. It had been a year since the accident, a year since the once vibrant boy had retreated into himself. Timmy sat in his favorite chair, his eyes staring out of the window but seeing nothing. His parents, Sarah and Mark, watched him from the doorway of the living room, the weight of their helplessness sinking into their bones. The boy they once knew, the one who would laugh and shout and run around with boundless energy, was now silent. Timmy had always been a talkative, curious boy, always asking questions and sharing his thoughts with his parents. He was bright, full of life, and loved to explore the world around him. But that all changed the day of the accident. The car crash had taken more than just physical injuries, it had taken his voice, his joy, and most of all, his connection to the world. After the crash, Timmy had stopped talking entirely. It was as though his words had been stolen from him, and no matter how hard they tried, his parents couldn't get him to speak again. Therapists and specialists said that Timmy might eventually recover, but his progress had been slow. Despite their best efforts, nothing seemed to help. The speech therapists could not get him to utter even a single word. The silence that had taken over their home felt suffocating. At night, Sarah would lie awake, listening to the emptiness that echoed through their house, and Mark would stare at the ceiling, wondering what had gone wrong. What had happened to their boy? "We've tried everything, Sarah," Mark would say quietly. "I don't know what else to do." Sarah's heart would ache with the same words. "I don't know either, Mark. But we can't give up on him." But the more they tried, the more it seemed like Timmy was slipping further and further away from them. His eyes had lost their spark, and he hardly played outside anymore. He spent his days in a quiet room, his gaze distant and detached. It was as though the boy they had raised was now a stranger. As the months passed, Sarah and Mark began to feel like they were losing a battle they didn't understand. They had tried talking to Timmy, hugging him, reading to him, but nothing worked. The silence was like a wall between them and their son, one they couldn't break through. The experts were kind, but their advice didn't seem to help. Sarah and Mark felt helpless, and though they never said it aloud, they both feared that they would never see their son truly come back to them. Then, one day, Sarah heard about an idea that filled her with a sense of hope. It was a simple suggestion from one of her colleagues: adopt a dog. A therapy dog. Sarah had heard about the positive effects dogs had on children, especially those dealing with trauma. Some children found it easier to connect with animals than with humans, and some studies suggested that dogs could help children speak again by offering them companionship and comfort. "I don't know if a dog will solve anything," Sarah said hesitantly to Mark that evening, "but I'm willing to try." Mark, who had always been the more cautious one, looked at Sarah, and after a long pause, he nodded. "Maybe it's worth a shot. If it helps him, then we'll do whatever it takes." They both agreed that a dog would be a big responsibility, especially with everything else they had to manage, but they decided that it could be the right step forward. They visited several animal shelters before they found a dog that seemed perfect for Timmy, a Labrador retriever named Rocky. When they brought Rocky home, Timmy barely reacted. He watched as the dog wagged his tail excitedly, moving around the house with energy. Rocky wasn't an overly large dog, but he had a calm, friendly demeanor. Still, Timmy didn't seem interested in him. He simply sat in his chair, his hands folded in his lap, watching the dog from a distance. I think he'll come around, Sarah said, hoping to reassure Mark. Dogs have a way of connecting with people. As the days passed, Sarah and Mark slowly began to notice subtle changes in Timmy's behavior. He would look at Rocky for longer periods of time, and when Rocky nuzzled his hand or sat beside him, Timmy seemed to relax just a little. There was something comforting about the dog's presence, something that wasn't demanding, something that just allowed Timmy to be. Rocky, for his part, seemed to understand exactly what Timmy needed. He didn't push him. He just sat by Timmy's side, offering his presence as a quiet, constant companion. Slowly, as the days turned into weeks, the bond between Timmy and Rocky began to grow. Timmy began to respond to the dog in small ways, lifting his hand to stroke Rocky's fur or pressing his face gently into the dog's soft coat. For the first time since the accident, Timmy seemed to be breaking free of the silent prison he had locked himself in. And as Rocky continued to offer him unconditional love and companionship, Sarah and Mark began to hope again. Maybe, just maybe, this was the key they had been searching for. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the Tanner household began to shift. Timmy, once locked in his silent world, was now more present. Though still withdrawn, he no longer seemed entirely distant. There was something about Rocky's unwavering presence that seemed to draw Timmy out of his shell. The dog had become his silent companion, his shadow, following him from room to room, patiently waiting for Timmy to make a move. Sarah and Mark watched from the sidelines, marveling at the changes, no matter how small. Every day, they saw signs of progress, Timmy reaching out for Rocky, occasionally rubbing the dog's ears, or even holding his leash as they went for walks together. It was as if the simple act of caring for Rocky, of being in his presence, was beginning to open up something inside of Timmy that had been locked away for so long. One afternoon, after an especially quiet morning, Sarah noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Timmy had been sitting in the living room, staring out the window, when Rocky trotted over and gently nudged his arm. For the first time in months, Timmy didn't retreat into himself. He turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting Rocky's. And then, as though something had clicked, Timmy whispered softly, "Rocky." Sarah's heart swelled with emotion. Timmy had spoken. It wasn't much, but it was everything. His first word since the accident. Timmy had spoken the name of his dog. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she rushed over to Timmy, wrapping him in a gentle hug. "Timmy, you spoke," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. Timmy stiffened at first, as though unsure of the reaction, but when he felt the warmth of his mother's embrace, something in his demeanor softened. He didn't say anything else, but his small smile spoke volumes. It was as if Timmy was testing the waters, dipping his toes into the world of words, unsure of what he might find but finding solace in Rocky's constant presence. Mark, who had been in the kitchen, came rushing into the room, drawn by the sound of Sarah's voice. He saw the tears on her face and the bright spark in Timmy's eyes. "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with both hope and concern. Timmy spoke. Sarah exclaimed, her heart racing with joy. He said, "Rocky." Mark's eyes widened in disbelief, and then he quickly joined them, kneeling beside Timmy. "Buddy," he said softly, "that's incredible. You did great." Timmy looked up at his father, his eyes still uncertain but filled with a spark of something they hadn't seen in so long. He glanced at Rocky, who was sitting beside him, tail wagging gently, as though he knew the importance of the moment. Timmy reached out and patted Rocky's head, his fingers trembling slightly, as if testing the bond that had begun to form between them. Over the next few days, Timmy's progress continued. Though his speech remained tentative, he began to use gestures to communicate with Rocky more frequently. He would point to the door when he wanted to go for a walk or tap his feet when he wanted to play fetch. Each small action, each simple sound, felt like a victory. And each time Timmy reached out for Rocky, the bond between them grew stronger. Sarah and Mark, though cautious, couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Their son was starting to open up, starting to find his voice again, and they knew it was because of Rocky's presence in their lives. There was no pressure for Timmy to speak. Rocky never demanded anything of him. He simply offered his companionship, his loyalty, and his love. And somehow, that was enough for Timmy. On one particularly rainy afternoon, as Timmy sat in the living room playing with a set of blocks, Rocky curled up beside him. Timmy absently reached out, running his hand over the dog's soft fur, the gesture both tender and comforting. He smiled softly, a new, more relaxed expression forming on his face. "Good boy, Rocky," Timmy whispered, his voice barely above a murmur, but it was clear and steady. For a moment, everything else faded away. Sarah and Mark exchanged a look across the room, their hearts full of emotion. It was as if they had been given a glimpse into the future, a future where their son could once again connect with the world, a future where he wasn't defined by his silence but by his ability to overcome it. The journey was far from over, but it was clear now that with Rocky by his side, Timmy had found a way to communicate. He had found the courage to speak, to express his needs, and to share his world with those around him. The healing had begun, not just for Timmy, but for the whole family. And as Sarah and Mark watched their son grow stronger every day, they knew one thing for certain: love, in all its forms, whether from a parent or a puppy, had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. As the days passed, Timmy's progress continued in small, heartwarming ways. He still wasn't speaking much, but his interactions with Rocky became more meaningful. The puppy's unwavering presence seemed to provide him with a sense of calm that no one else could offer. Every time Timmy felt overwhelmed or frustrated, Rocky would be right there beside him, nuzzling his hand or curling up next to him on the couch. The dog had become his anchor, the one source of unconditional love and comfort that never asked for anything in return. One afternoon, as Timmy played with his blocks on the living room floor, Rocky sat nearby, watching him intently. The dog had become an integral part of Timmy's daily routine. He would follow Timmy around the house, staying close, always ready to be a part of whatever Timmy was doing. Timmy had started to make small sounds, tentative whispers at first, but they were growing more frequent. Sarah and Mark could see that Timmy was beginning to trust the process of healing, his silent world slowly being replaced with the possibility of communication. "Rocky," Timmy whispered one day, looking at his dog with a newfound sense of recognition. His voice was still soft, barely above a whisper, but it was no longer a sound of frustration or hesitation. It was a word, a bridge to something bigger, something deeper. Rocky, ever attentive, trotted over to Timmy, his tail wagging, and nudged his hand gently. It was as though the dog understood the significance of the moment. Timmy smiled, a wide grin breaking across his face for the first time in a long while. His connection with Rocky was growing, and with it, his ability to communicate. The next morning, as Timmy and Sarah sat at the kitchen table for breakfast, Timmy pointed to his cereal bowl and then to the spoon on the table. It was a small gesture, but it was an important one. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she realized that Timmy was not only recognizing the objects around him, but he was also beginning to understand how to communicate his needs without words. she immediately praised him. "Timmy, you're doing so well," she said, her voice full of pride. Timmy smiled shyly, clearly pleased with the recognition. Later that day, while Mark was home for lunch, Timmy and Rocky were playing together in the backyard. Mark watched from the window as Timmy laughed softly, throwing a ball for Rocky to fetch. The sound of his laughter was enough to bring tears to Mark's eyes. It had been so long since they had heard Timmy laugh, a sound that was full of life and joy. And now, here it was, triggered by his bond with Rocky. "Look at him," Mark said to Sarah, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe how far he's come." Sarah smiled through her own tears. "Rocky has done more for him than I could ever imagine. They're like two halves of a whole." That evening, Timmy was sitting on the couch with Rocky, gently running his hand through the dog's fur. The comforting rhythm of the motion seemed to help calm his mind, and he began to whisper again, his voice stronger this time. "Rocky, good boy," Timmy said quietly, looking at the dog with a deep sense of affection. Sarah and Mark exchanged a look of astonishment. Timmy had said more than just the dog's name, he had spoken a sentence, however small. It was a breakthrough, a sign that Timmy was becoming more comfortable with his voice, with the world around him, and with himself. In the following weeks, Timmy's confidence grew. He began speaking more frequently, his words still soft and uncertain, but increasingly filled with purpose. He would say, "please," when he wanted something, and "thank you" when he received it. At first, the words were like a spark, small but powerful, igniting a fire of communication that had been dormant for so long. Timmy's parents couldn't contain their excitement as they watched their son slowly but surely emerge from the silence he had lived in for so long. They knew that there was still a long road ahead, but they could also see that Timmy was on the path to recovery, one word at a time. It was clear that Rocky had played an irreplaceable role in Timmy's healing journey. The dog had been there for every small victory, every quiet whisper, and every moment of trust. Rocky had been more than a pet, he had been a companion, a source of support, and a catalyst for change. He had given Timmy the courage to face the world, to speak, and to be heard. As they all sat together one evening, watching Timmy interact with Rocky, Mark and Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. They had adopted a puppy, thinking they were giving their son a companion, but in reality, it was Rocky who had given them the greatest gift of all, the sound of their son's voice. And that, they realized, was just the beginning. As Timmy continued to make progress, the milestones began to stack up, each one more significant than the last. His parents could hardly believe how far he had come. Every day was a new opportunity for Timmy to grow stronger, both emotionally and physically, and a lot of that strength came from the quiet, ever-present support of Rocky. One afternoon, as the family sat down for dinner, Timmy surprised them. He had been pointing and using small words to communicate, but this time was different. As Sarah placed his plate of food on the table, Timmy looked at her and said clearly, "Thank you." His voice, though soft, carried the weight of so much more than just gratitude. It was a sign of his continued recovery, a sign that he was learning to trust not only his voice but also the world around him. "Timmy, did you just say thank you?" Mark asked, his voice filled with disbelief and awe. Timmy nodded and smiled, and Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She quickly leaned over and kissed his forehead. "I'm so proud of you, my love," she whispered. Timmy, still smiling, reached down to pat Rocky, who was sitting loyally at his feet. "Rocky," he said softly, his voice full of affection. "Good boy. It was a small sentence, but it carried an immense weight. Rocky's tail thumped gently on the floor, as if he understood just how important those words were. Over the following weeks, Timmy's vocabulary expanded. He started to say more sentences, more clearly and with more confidence. Words that had once been stuck inside him, words that had seemed unreachable, were finally coming out. And it wasn't just about talking. It was about communication in its entirety. Timmy was starting to understand that he had a voice, a place in the world where he could express himself, thanks to his bond with Rocky. One afternoon, while Timmy was playing with Rocky in the backyard, his parents watched from the porch. Timmy was laughing as Rocky chased after a ball, his small hands flapping in excitement. The sound of Timmy's laughter, pure and genuine, was something they had waited for, and now it was a constant presence in their home. Rocky had brought something back into their lives that they had feared was lost forever: joy. "Look at him," Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never thought I'd see him like this. I thought he'd always be so quiet, so withdrawn." Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "He's come so far," he said quietly. "I think we owe a lot of it to Rocky." The next breakthrough came when Timmy, who had always shied away from social interactions, started to engage with other children in the neighborhood. He wasn't quite ready to speak openly with them, but he would point to Rocky and gesture for them to play. It was a small gesture, but it was huge. It meant that Timmy was ready to start reconnecting with the world outside of his family, and Rocky had given him the courage to take that step. Timmy's bond with his dog had become more than just a source of comfort. It had become the foundation for everything else. Rocky had been with him every step of the way, through the silence, the uncertainty, and the pain, and had quietly, gently helped Timmy find his voice. It was a process that couldn't have happened without the dog's unwavering patience and love. One day, after a long therapy session, Timmy was sitting on the couch, a bit tired but content. He had been practicing his speech exercises, and he had finally begun stringing words together more fluidly. Rocky, as always, was by his side, resting his head in Timmy's lap. "I love you, Rocky," Timmy whispered, his voice full of tenderness. He had never said those words before, but today they came so easily. As soon as the words left his lips, Rocky's tail wagged, and he looked up at Timmy with eyes full of loyalty and affection. Mark and Sarah, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped into the room. Their hearts swelled with emotion at the sight of their son and his dog, both of them thriving together. "We've come so far, haven't we?" Sarah said, her voice full of pride. "We have," Mark agreed. "We've come a long way, and it's all because of Rocky." Timmy looked up at his parents, his smile wide and full of hope. For the first time, he didn't just feel like a boy who was struggling. He felt like a boy who had a future, one that was full of possibilities, thanks to his bond with Rocky and the healing power of unconditional love. As Timmy's speech continued to improve, so did his emotional and social development. He began to engage with his peers, slowly at first, but with growing confidence. His world, once silent and uncertain, was now filled with sound and connection. And through it all, Rocky remained by his side, ever patient, ever loving, a constant reminder that with trust, time, and the unwavering support of a loyal friend, anything was possible. Timmy and Rocky's journey was far from over, but they had already achieved something extraordinary. Together, they had overcome the barriers that once seemed insurmountable, and the future now seemed wide open. And for the first time in a long time, Timmy felt like he belonged, not just in his family, but in the world. The story of Timmy and Rocky teaches us the importance of patience, love, and companionship in healing. It illustrates how animals, especially dogs, can offer profound emotional support, helping children overcome their most difficult struggles. Timmy's journey from silence to speech shows the transformative power of unconditional love, trust, and the bond between humans and animals. This story serves as a reminder that sometimes, the healing we need doesn't come from a traditional source, but from the loyalty and affection of a companion who simply believes in us. It reflects the significant role that animals can play in improving mental and emotional well-being, helping to build confidence, break barriers, and heal wounds that might seem impossible to overcome.